Chapter 5. I made 2 Easter eggs, one for Will and one for Molly. Not just plain old hard-boiled eggs that you dye with those vinegar-smelling colors that never come out looking the way you hoped they would. Molly and I used to do that when we were little, dozens of them, and then we wouldn't eat them, and they turned rotten. No, these were special, and there were only 2 of them. I blew the insides out of 2 white eggs so that only the shells were left, very fragile and light. Then I spent hours in my room painting them. Molly's was yellow, partly I guess because it reminded me of her blonde hair, and partly because my parents told me that her hospital room was depressingly gray-colored, and I thought that yellow would cheer it up a bit. Then over the pale yellow egg, I used my tiniest brush and painted narrow, curving lines in gold, and between the lines, miniature blue flowers with gold and white centers. It took a long time, because the eggshell was so delicate and the painting so small and intricate, but it was worth it. When it was finished, the egg was truly beautiful. I varnished it to make it shiny and permanent, and when it was dry, I packed it in cotton in a box to protect it, and Mom took it with her when she drove to Portland to visit Molly. It worked, too. I mean, it did make the room more cheerful, Mom said. Molly was lots better, and coming home the next week. In the beginning, she had been very sick. They had first thing given her blood transfusions. Then, when she was feeling better, they decided to do a lot of tests to find out what was wrong so that her nose wouldn't bleed anymore. They even had specialists see her. You'd think that with medical science as advanced as it's supposed to be, that they could figure out what the trouble was and fix her up pretty quickly. I mean, nosebleeds. What's the big deal about that? It's not as if she had a mysterious tropical disease or something. But first, Mom said after they put all that new blood into her, they started taking blood out to test it. Then they did tests on the inside of her bones. Then they x-rayed her. Then, when they thought they knew what was causing the nosebleeds, they started fooling around with all the different kinds of medicines to see what would work best. One day, Mom and Dad went in, and when they came home, they told me that special medicine had been injected into Molly's spine. That gave me the creeps. It made me mad, too, because it seemed to me that they were just experimenting on her for Pete's sake. By that time, they knew what the trouble was. Her blood didn't clot right, so they just should have given her whatever medicine would fix that and sent her home. But no, instead they started fooling around, trying different things, keeping her there longer. And my parents were very strange about the whole thing. They were just like the doctors. They didn't even think of Molly as a person anymore. They talked about her as if she were a clinical specimen. They came home from the hospital and talked very coldly about different drugs with long names, whether this one was better than that one. They talked about reactions, side effects, contraindications. It was hard to believe they were talking about Molly. I kept my mouth shut as long as I could. But then one night at dinner, the only thing they talked about was something called cyclophosphamide. There I was, sitting there with them, and I wanted to talk about other things. My darkroom, my Easter eggs that I was working so hard on, what I was going to do during spring vacation from school. Anything. Anything that is except cyclophosphamide, which I didn't know anything about and couldn't pronounce. Stop it, I said angrily. Stop talking about it. If you want to talk about Molly, then talk about Molly, not her stupid medicine. You haven't even sent in her camp application, Mom. It's still on your desk. They both looked as if I had thrown something at them. But it worked. I don't think I heard the word cyclophosphamide again, and for a while they talked of other things, and life was somewhat normal. And now Molly will be home soon, all better, and no more nosebleeds. And after all that business with the fancy drugs, it turned out that what she ended up with is pills. When she comes home, she'll have to take pills for a while. Big deal. They could have found that out when she got there and sent her home sooner. But since they didn't, I made the Easter egg for Molly to cheer her up, and I made another one for Will. Will's egg was blue and special in a different way. I thought and thought about how to paint it, and finally I looked up spices in the encyclopedia and found a picture of nutmeg. I painted tiny nutmeg blossoms all over his eggshell, intertwined so that they formed a complicated pattern of orange, brown, and green over the blue background. I varnished and packed it, and on Easter Sunday, I took the box with his egg and the envelope with his pictures and walked down the road to his house. I hadn't seen Will since Molly got sick. Things were just too complicated at first. My parents spent a lot of time at the hospital, and I had to do most of the cooking. Then, when she was getting better, my father had to work doubly hard on the book because he hadn't been able to concentrate on it when she was so sick. I realized that I hadn't been concentrating on my schoolwork either for the same reason, so I had a lot of catching up to do too. But finally, things were calming down. It was school vacation, Molly was getting better, and even the mud outside had dried up a little. At night it would still freeze, and in fact I noticed, as I walked past, that there were tire tracks frozen into the driveway of the big house across the field. That was another reason I wanted to see Will. After that first awful night, when I had seen the light in the window, other things had been happening at the house. Nothing seemed as mysterious as that light in the middle of the night. Still, I was curious. There was a car at the house occasionally, and the driveway had been cleared of the last spring muddied bits of snow. Sometimes, when the day was very quiet, I could hear the sound of saws and hammers coming from the house. Once I had seen the figure of a man on the roof working. It certainly looked as if someone were getting ready to move in. I asked my father if the nephew had gotten permission to turn the house into an inn, but Dad said he hadn't heard anything about it. On the other hand, Dad pointed out, he'd been so distracted and so busy that he probably wouldn't have noticed if spaceships had landed in the field. Will was under the hood of his truck again. I should have taken my camera with me. If there is one way in which I will always remember Will, it is under the hood of that old truck. "Is it your battery again, Will?" I called as I approached him. He straightened up and grinned. "Meg, I was hoping someone would drop in for tea. In fact, I have the kettle on. I'm so glad fate sent you instead of Clarice Calloway. She's been hinting for years that she'll come to call someday, and I live in perpetual fear of seeing her heading down this road with her Sunday hat on and a fistful of overdue library slips to deliver." I giggled. Clarice Calloway is the village librarian. She's 82 years old, and I'm not giving away any secrets when I say that, because she tells everyone that herself as soon as they're introduced to her. She's also the president of the Historical Preservation Society, and my father says that's a real exercise in irony because Clarice herself is the best preserved historical monument for miles around. Also, she has a crush on Will. He told me that whenever he goes to the library, she disappears into the ladies' room and then comes out again with bright pink rouge on her cheeks, so that she looks like a French doll his sister had when she was a child. He sighed and wiped his hands on a rag. "It's the radiator this time. In the winter, it's the battery, and when spring comes, it's the radiator. The tires go flat in summer. Sometimes I think I'll buy a new truck, but then I figure I'd have to learn to deal with a whole new set of disasters. At least now I know that every April the radiator hoses will break and the engine will overheat. Better to know what your enemy is before you confront him, right, Meg?" "Right," I agreed, even though I wasn't at all sure I wanted to be confronted by enemies or disasters, whether I knew them or not. "Come inside," Will said. "I have a surprise for you." But my surprise was first. After Will had poured tea for both of us, I opened the big envelope and took out the pictures. I laid the 6 of them on the kitchen table and watched as Will picked them up one at a time. He didn't laugh or blush or say, "Oh, I look terrible," the way kids do when they see pictures of themselves. I knew he wouldn't. He picked up each one and studied it, smiling at some, looking thoughtfully at others. Finally, he chose the same one that was my favorite, the one where his eyes were closed and the smoke from his pipe was a thin line along the side and the top of the photograph. He took it to the window and looked at it in better light. "Meg," he said at last, "all of these are very, very good. You know that already, I'm sure. This is the best one, I think, because of the composition, and also because you hit on just the right combination of shutter speed and aperture setting. You see how the lines in the face are perfectly sharp. You must have a pretty good lens on that little camera of yours. But you slowed it just enough so that the line of smoke has a slight blur to it, as it should. Smoke has an ephemeral quality, and you caught that, but you didn't sacrifice the clarity of the face. It's a fine photograph." Why did I want to cry when he finished talking? I don't even know what ephemeral means, but something inside me welled up like hot fudge sauce, sweet and warm and so rich that you can't bear to have very much. It was because someone who was a real friend was having the exact same feelings I was having about something that was more important to me than anything else. I bet there are people who go through a whole life and never experience that. I sat there with my hand around the warm mug of tea and smiled at Will.
"Meg," he said suddenly, gulping his own tea, "I'll make a deal with you." I laughed. People say that to me at school, and it means they want to copy my algebra homework, and in return I get the Hostess Twinkie from their lunch. "Remember I told you that I had bought a camera in Germany?" I nodded. "It's a fine camera," Will said, "the best made, and of course something like that doesn't diminish with age. I don't know why I haven't used it in so long, except that I lost my enthusiasm for a lot of things when Margaret died. And that," he said gruffly, "is the last thing she would have wanted. But I'm going to get it out of the attic. The camera and 4 lenses and a set of filters that go with it. I want you to use it."
The hot fudge started up again. My own camera has just one lens, which can't be removed. I've read about using other kinds of lenses and filters, but I've never had a chance to try. I don't know what to say. I told him, and it was true. What could I possibly do in return?
"Oh, don't worry about that," laughed Will. "I said I'd make a deal with you. I'm not going to let you off easily either. In return, I want you to teach me to use the darkroom. Let me borrow your little camera while you're using mine, and we'll set up a regular schedule for lessons. I'll warn you that it's been a long time since I've undertaken to learn anything new. But my eyesight is good, and my hands are steady still."
"But Will," I wailed, "I'm only 13 years old. I've never taught anybody anything." Will looked at me very sternly.
"My dear Meg," he said, "Mozart wrote his first composition when he was 5. Age is a meaningless commodity in most instances. Don't underrate yourself. Now, is it a deal?"
I sat there for a moment looking at my empty mug. Then I shook his hand. He was right. His hands were firm and strong and steady. "It's a deal, Will," I said. I remembered the Easter egg. In a way, it seemed almost silly now, but I brought out the little box and gave it to him. He held the egg up gravely and examined the design. His eyes lit up with recognition.
"Myristica fragrance,"
he pronounced solemnly.
"Nutmeg. Am I right?"
I grinned at him and nodded. "I don't know about the mystica or whatever you said, but it's nutmeg." You're right. He put the egg into a shallow pewter bowl and took it to the living room. After he had put the bowl on a small pine table by the window, both of us stood in the room and looked at it. The blue of the egg was the same muted blue as the oriental rug. The rust and green shades seemed to reflect the colors of the old wood and the hanging, well-tended plants. It was perfect there. Will didn't even have to say so. We just looked at it together as the April sunlight from the window fell onto the bowl and the fragile oval shell, outlined their shadows on the polished table, and then brightened a rectangle on the pattern of the carpet. "Now scoot," said Will. "I have to deal with my radiator." I was just at the end of his muddy driveway and his head was back under the hood of the truck when I remembered. I turned and called to him. "Will, I forgot to ask you about the big house." He brought his head out and groaned. "And I forgot to tell you my surprise." So I went back for a minute. I sat on the front steps and scratched Tip beside his ear, while Will pulled the radiator hoses off. "Rotten old things," he said to them. "Why do you do this to me every spring?" And told me about the house. My question, it turned out, was the same as his surprise. "I was right here last month," he said, "with my head under the hood, as usual. The battery, then, of course. And a car drove up with a young couple in it. They asked if I knew anything about that house. In the past year, at least 10 people have asked me about the house, but they've always been the wrong people. Don't ask me how I know that. Just something I can feel. And when this young couple, Ben and Maria, their names are, got out of their car, I could tell they were the right ones. Ben helped me clean the leads to the battery, and Maria went in the kitchen and made tea for the 3 of us. By the time Ben and I had washed our hands and finished our tea, I had rented the house to them. When you know it's the right people, it's as easy as that. They don't have much money. He's a student still at Harvard, and he said he was looking for a quiet place for the summer to write his thesis." I groaned. Next thing you knew, this whole valley would be noisy from the sound of typewriters. Will laughed. He'd had the same thought. "But in return for the summer in the house, I'm going to fix the place up. He's been working weekends ever since I told them they could have the house. The roof needs work, the wiring needs work, the plumbing needs work. Well, you know what it's like when you get old with no one to take care of you." We laughed together. I could tell already that I would like Ben and Maria, because Will did. "And Maria's going to put in a garden when the ground thaws," he continued. "They'll be moving in officially quite soon, I think, and I've told them about you. They're looking forward to having you stop in, Meg." Then Will looked a little sheepish, the first time I'd ever seen him look that way. "But I forgot to ask them something," he confessed. "What?" He looked in several other directions before he answered. He was embarrassed. Finally, he explained. "I forgot to ask them if they're married." I burst out laughing. "Oh, Will," I said, "do you think it matters?" He looked as if it hadn't occurred to him that it might not matter. "Well," he said finally, "I can tell you that it would have mattered to Margaret. But, well, I guess maybe you're right, Meg. I guess it doesn't really matter to me." Then he wiped his hands on his rag and grinned. "It might matter to their child, though. From the looks of it, there's going to be a baby coming this summer." A baby? That was a strange thing to think about. I'm not overly fond of babies. Molly adores them. She says she's going to have at least 6 someday herself, even though I keep telling her that's environmentally absurd. I told Molly about it on the phone that night, and she was thrilled at the thought of having a baby in the house across the field. Her voice sounded good, stronger than it has since she got sick. I've talked to her on the phone a lot, and sometimes she sounded tired and depressed. But now she's feeling well again, and she's looking forward to coming home. "It's a drag being here," she said. even though there are some good-looking doctors. That made me laugh. I knew she was feeling normal again if she was noticing the doctors. I told her how much Will liked his photographs and that he was going to let me use his German camera. "Hey, Meg," she asked, "do me a favor." "Sure." Usually I wouldn't say sure without knowing what the favor was, but what the heck? She'd been pretty sick. "Would you take my picture when I get home? I want a really good one to give Tierney for his birthday this summer." "Molly, I'll make you look like a movie star," I told her, and she giggled before she hung up.